I just want to say a couple of things which brought me into all of this. One is Neil mentioned the Royal Academy of Engineering, where I'm a fellow, and I chaired the COVID response committee. And one of the things that I tried to do during those rather stressful days was to try and get the engineers to talk to the medics and the medics to talk to the engineers. The trouble was, from the side of being an engineer, all the engineers had brilliant ideas about how to solve these problems and had really technical designs and all sorts of stuff that bore no resemblance to the actual need on the ground. And it was only by chance, I know we didn't need the Nightingales in the end, but I'll give you an example of the kind of thing that was going on. It turned out that the BP Research Institute here was doing some work on airflow, and I knew the people there. And it turned out that the design for the airflow in the Nightingales was going to cause massive nosocomial infections, right? And we had to redesign all the air conditioning and all the airflow systems in the Nightingales as a result of that connection. Now, I'm mentioning that because it's completely unexpected. It's serendipity, in effect, that because we were working across disciplines and because all of those things were bumping into each other unexpectedly, we were able to solve a particular problem. I could go on at length about the ventilators, about some of the PPE stuff, and about all the other stuff, right? So I have first-hand experience. And as I recount it, honestly, the stress is coming back. Heaven knows what you guys were going through during that time, right? But we seem to be, we need to learn the lessons of that. Back to what Neil was saying about the crossover and the multidisciplinary nature of that. Another point I want to make is I helped start a thing called Cambridge Angels. Now, to give you some idea about how big Cambridge Angels is these days, when it started, it was a little club. Cambridge Angels has now invested, together with other partners, around about £1 billion in Cambridge startups and other things. One of the things you get a very sceptical reaction from Cambridge Angels is if you are proposing anything to do with medical or diagnostics. In particular, if you are proposing that you get the NHS as a client. It's an absolute no-no, right? And I need to be absolutely brutal about that because that is the situation in which we're facing. Engineering and medicine, I don't see how you distinguish between them, really. I mean, you know, I mean, without being teleological about it, right? I'm a piece of engineering. I mean, I might be wet rather than dry like a car, but basically it's engineering. And if you look in an operating theatre, although everybody's eyes are drawn to perhaps the surgeon and the anaesthetist and other bits of pieces, mostly it's bits of kit. Go to a ward, look down the ward, even the ward design, right? And all of that is all engineering. So as Pascal Soriot said, that the discovery of the vaccine for AstraZeneca was that much. The engineering to get the vaccine out into people was that much, right? And yet, of course, we're victims of this media idea that somehow engineering is somebody fixing your boiler as opposed to somebody actually making it possible to go from a lab to actually having a vaccine deployed for millions and millions of people. It's not just that, it's the mRNA vaccines, all of that stuff. The other point that Neil makes is about patients being the centre of design. John Clarkson, I don't know if anybody here knows John, he's in the engineering department, and I work very closely with him. In fact, we're about to merge two of our committees of the Royal Academy of Engineering. He's very big on systems thinking, as I am, and on particularly in understanding how patients, when he's dealing with the healthcare stuff, how patients need to be absolutely the centre of the analysis. So we don't need to have, you know, the medics and the engineers sidling up to each other. Actually, we need to sidle up to the patients and understand much more about what their needs are and what their requirements are. But we're separated by all sorts of bits of argot, of language, of terms. Neil referred to management. I was with Lisa Chappell last Thursday for a lecture, who's a CSA for health, and she referred to the workforce. What? Like, all I see before me is people. I don't see a workforce. I don't see management. I mean, I might respect a doctor because of particular things, but actually, you're all individuals. I mean, I don't want to quote the life of Brian at this point, but the point is that the point is that the language is really a difficult issue. I got called in by number 10 with the Royal Academy of Engineering. Well, I got called in by number 10 actually about 2 years ago or 3 years ago to help with the health white paper. And literally, we're being recorded, aren't we? I will say that we took it no further. The jargon that I was assailed by made it impossible to do anything. Literally. So I think we need to approach this not by we need to educate clinicians or we need to educate engineers. We all need to learn from each other. Some of you may know that I set up the Centre for Science and Policy at the University of Cambridge. That was founded on the idea that we would bring people in from Whitehall. We would give them 30 experts to talk to for an hour. Not 30 experts at a time for an hour, that would be far too much, sequentially. That they would then go back with a network, they would have some exposed to some fresh ideas, and later on they will be able to call on people to be able to get advice. That's worked very well. We've had 14,000 of those meetings now, and Cambridge is probably the best networked university into Whitehall in the UK. But there's another principal point here, which is instead of academics writing reports and hitting policymakers over the head with them, this was a peer-to-peer networking, right? Academics need to learn from the policymakers about what their problems are, and the policymakers need to learn from the academics. It's a two-way process. It's not one way. And I think that as I'm going to make a shameless plug now, and Tim at the back there will nod knowingly, because I've got a book coming out on the 25th of June called Serendipity: It Doesn't Happen by Accident. And the point about that book is to show how networking, and I use Cambridge in one of the chapters as a particular example, how this networking between people leads to different ideas. I mean, I sat down one day at dinner, unexpectedly sitting next to a chap called Jonathan Milner, and as a result, we started AdCap. And my entire career has been exactly like that. And one of the problems that I see in the NHS is that you guys appear to be in silos. When you use words like workforce and management, it indicates to me that you've got brick walls, or worse, between all the various disciplines and all the various ways of thinking. Quite apart from anything else, the horrific decision for the Papworth when it came onto this site not to use Epic, for example, is an indication to me that there is a serious fundamental problem about the way in which we're thinking about networking. Cambridge is the most successful city in the UK. It's grown faster than any city's ever grown in the UK. Why does it grow like that? It's because it's got networks, because it's multidisciplinary, as Neil said at the end, and we need to be thinking much more about that in order to give the NHS and medical science, frankly, a bit of a boost. And I think that it would give engineering a bit of a boost as well, because I'm fed up with very bright engineers with all the very best intentions designing gadgets or proposing things that actually have no real clinical or practical application because they haven't understood what is actually required. And it's these invisible systems that really matter. I think we need to be thinking about building networks that will do this. And the reason why I've been talking to Neil is because of this clinician engineer idea, that the idea that we could build these networks that would actually throw up stuff that none of us in this room would ever imagine was possible. Now that's what I've been doing. That's what I've been doing. I mean, for the last few decades, doing stuff that I never imagined might be possible by encountering people, by coming across new ideas, by getting resources together. And this is a global challenge, right? The reason why New York will be so interested is Americans, despite what is happening politically over there at the moment, in general, their culture does see these things as great opportunities that I've seen when I've visited Boston or San Francisco or even New York. We need to be thinking about this, but thinking about it on a global scale, right? It's fine. We can do this in Cambridge, but there are a lot of people out there. I'm continually struck, particularly in policy and some areas, for example, in transport planning, how little anybody really understands what's happening in Asia, in particular in East Asia, China, Southeast Asia. There are some things underway that we need to get on top of. You mentioned AI obliquely. This entire list was written as a result of me chatting with one of the AI bots and just getting a list out. The bot knows about my book and therefore gave me a list. I haven't really read it out, but it's a pretty comprehensive way. And in the way that this AI has now helped me just make a apparently extemporaneous speech, is exactly the way in which we should be thinking about the way in which these things might change the way in which we operate. Now, we have the people, we've got the culture, we've got the network, we've got all the resources. We should be able to do something here that, in the same way that Cambridge has done some really unique things. Neil was kind enough to mention Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi, as an organisation, when you actually dig into it and how it works, is completely unique. It is a computer company owned by a charity and for a charitable purpose. Nobody had done that around the world. I mean, Mozilla had done something with the foundation, but that was a post hoc thing. It wasn't what we set out to do. Things like ARM, for example, were completely different in breaking business models. The stuff we've done with Cambridge Network or Cambridge Wireless, or the stuff that I'm involved in policy making with Cambridge Ahead, looking ahead 20 or 30 years into where the future of Cambridge. All of these things are cross-disciplinary. That's the way in which we should think. That is Cambridge's strength. That is where that's where we need to be. And if you're interested, Neil told me not to say this, but you should follow up with him. And send him lots of emails. And we've got a few minutes, I think, for a bit of Q&A. Thank you very much.